My husband has always loved the woods and nature just as much as me, so when I found out that he had never been camping, I just knew I'd have to take him. Keep in mind, I've only been camping at the beach my whole life, never in the forest. About 2 years ago, my husband and I and our 3-year-old daughter moved to Arizona. We moved to Phoenix, and being only about 2 hours away from Flagstaff, I decided to take him camping. We ended up in Williams, a smaller town 30 minutes away from Flagstaff. We loved it there. The forest was beautiful, and it was so quiet away from the city. It was amazing. We didn't find a spot to camp until about 9 o'clock at night. The spot we chose was pretty nice. It was right by Coleman Lake, which isn't a lake at all. It's a big patch of grass. It's a little open field surrounded by trees. There's also a little dirt road that goes through it. And the best part was we were a good ways away from any other campers. We set our tents up in the dark. Our only light was coming from our car. When we were all done, we started a fire. Our daughter was tired, so we put her in the tent right behind us to go to bed. About 2 hours had passed, and we decided to turn in for the night. At 3:28 a.m., I woke up. I don't know exactly what woke me up, but I had a really weird feeling. I laid there looking up at the top of the tent for what felt like forever. That's when I heard it. From somewhere in the woods behind me, something was walking towards our tent. I told myself it was probably just a deer or an elk, since we could hear elk practically screaming most of the night, so I knew they were close by. But whatever it was stopped right behind our tent and didn't move for what felt like hours. I was so scared I couldn't move. I couldn't wake up my husband, who had his gun with him, to tell him something was outside. I don't know how long I lay there waiting for it to move, to walk away or do something. But soon the sun came up, and that was the end of it. I pulled myself together and went outside to check, but nothing was there, and I swear it never left. I told my husband and he brushed it off. You probably fell asleep at some point and the deer just walked off. As much as I believed otherwise, I brushed it off. The next night went just the same as the first. Something walked up to the tent, stood there, and disappeared. It would be 2 months before we went camping again. Knowing that area the best, we decided to stay in the same campsite as before. This time my parents came with us. When night came, my husband and I were left sitting by the fire as everyone went to bed. I began recalling the last time we stayed here, and my husband pointed out that there were a lot of elk in the area, and that's probably all it was. As we talked, we could hear elk screaming in the distance all around us. At 3:29 a.m., I woke up to something walking towards our tent. I was prepared to wake up my husband this time, not wanting to look crazy. When this thing stopped once again behind our tent, I turned over to wake him up, when something else happened that made me freeze. It started walking around the tent. It walked around the right side of the tent, the side I was laying on, stopped, picked something up and began dragging whatever it was all the way to the front of the tent. It almost sounded like it was dragging a large stick. The second it got to the door of our tent, I somehow was able to wake my husband and tell him someone was standing in front of our tent. Luckily, he has always been a man of action. So the second I said that, he grabbed his gun and opened the tent. All of this took no more than a few seconds, but nothing was there. He got a flashlight and walked around the area, but found nothing. He said if someone or something was out there in front of our tent, like I said, then we would have at least seen it or heard it running away. But I knew what I heard. I wasn't crazy. The rest of the night we stayed up together, but nothing happened. The next morning, I asked my parents if they heard anything. My father said no, but my mother said she thought she heard someone walking around outside, but assumed it was us. And with that answer, I knew I wasn't just hearing things. This was real. On the next night, I convinced my husband to stay up with me. We sat in the tent in silence. Around 3 a.m., my husband began to complain he was tired. As I tried to beg him to stay awake, we heard the loudest scream from an elk I have ever heard. Soon, it sounded like a whole herd of them came running past our campsite from behind us. Scared from how close they got, we sat up and just stared at each other for what seemed like forever. Something must have scared them, probably a mountain lion or something, my husband said, still staring at me with wild eyes. Then, from a ways behind our tent, something started walking towards us. I grabbed his arm and told him it's here. He grabbed his gun and jumped out of the tent the second it was behind us, but nothing was there. It took several months before I was willing to go back. I don't know how I was convinced, but I decided to give it a third try. Once again, we went to the same spot, my husband and I, our daughter, and my parents. To spare you the repetitive story, the first night went the same as usual. However, this time my husband heard it all too. Something walking up to the tent and standing there. My husband goes out and scanned the whole area, yet still nothing. Our second night is when it got more interesting and a lot more scary. Sitting by the fire when everyone else was asleep, we talked about the previous night. Everything was always fine when we'd come out of the tent. It was only when we were inside that things started to happen. My husband suggested we sleep outside by the fire this time. That way, if we hear anything, we'd just have to open our eyes to see it. I was unsure about not having the safety of the tent protecting me, but I said okay. We decided to take shifts staying awake. He went first, and once the fire started to die, he would wake me up to help put more wood on. Then we would switch until the fire burned out again. It went on like this for several hours, but the later it got, the harder it was to stay awake. On one of my shifts, I fell asleep. I was slowly woken up by the sound of something passing by, and then it passed by again and again. It passed back and forth several times before realization hit me. I fell asleep. I sat up fast and looked around. It was pitch black, and I couldn't even see anything more than a foot away from me. A feeling of fear came over me that I can't explain. It was like a sense of doom. Something was out there. I just couldn't see it. I woke up my husband and we quickly got the fire going again, and it was my turn to sleep. Eventually, I was woken up to the sound of my husband whispering to me, "Hey, wake up, hey." I woke up, thinking he probably needs me to help with the fire, but when I looked over, he was still sleeping, and the fire was out. I looked around, that same feeling of doom rushing over me. Not bothering to wake him up, I got the fire started again. As soon as the small area around us was full of light, the feeling went away. I stood up and walked to the edge of the firelight and looked out into the darkness. It was like the fire made a wall that separated us from whatever was out there, and it felt like whatever it was, it wasn't friendly. The next morning we packed to go home and talked about what happened. Of course, no one believed us, but we knew something was out there. Later, my husband said he had heard something that night too. Something that sounded like me trying to wake him up. Something calling him over. And when he woke up, I was asleep. That was the last time we went camping there, and to be honest, I don't know if I'll ever go camping again. At least, not in those woods. I'm in the army, and I'm a firm believer in all things weird and unexplainable. I've had many encounters under my belt. A few months back, we were out on maneuvers, just a big 16-day field event that no one wanted to do, more so than usual. It was cold and wet, and the food was trashier than we expected, no corned beef hash. We kept jumping TOCs every few days, and it's a lot of work. We just jumped locations and parked the trucks. There's a big mud pit that used to be a clearing earlier in the day. The trucks started struggling, so for space and safety, they are on opposite sides of the pit from each other. Everyone bugs out and goes to bed. It's just me and the driver for A500. He's looking at me in the dark like, crap, they left us, in the absence of leadership. So we headed into the woods behind HQ 300 and start working on making a campsite. The driver leaves and I'm working under red lens to drop our gear. I'm alone and the wind is shooting through the trees, making all sorts of weird crackling. Then I hear it. It's a subtle crackling that tries to imitate the noise of the forest. Super creepy. I'm low-key freaked out. It slowly becomes a pattern, like someone walking at uneven intervals through the trees. The noise is different. You can track its progress as it moves with or against the pattern of the wind. It's circling me slowly. I look around and don't see anything because red lens doesn't travel very far. That's the whole point of using it. I flip my helmet over and spot a silver dollar-sized spider with legs clinging surreptitiously to the inside. Screw it, I want to sleep in the truck. It takes a little convincing, but I talk the driver into setting up camp in the bed of the HQ 300, at least for the night. We tarp over the rails and start settling in. He goes to sleep almost immediately. I'm struggling with my socks and thermals. I hear it again. It's so close that I expect to see someone. Someone should definitely be visible at this range, even under red lens. I even saw people earlier and they were louder and easier to spot. Nothing. I slid under the tarp and go to sleep. Middle of the night. I'm awake and I can hear it. Definitely not the wind. It's walking around the HQ 300, just steady footsteps, clomping quietly around the edge. It stops at the tailgate where we have our heads. I tip my head back and I'm waiting to see hands, eyes, a face, anything come up over the edge of the gate. Nothing. I go back to sleep. The next day we move our camp back up to the original place in the woods. I get to talking with the TC who slept in the cabin of our truck. I mention trouble sleeping and he lights me up. He says he didn't sleep well, but in the middle of the night, something hit the HQ 300 so hard the whole truck rocked on its axles. It's a 22,000-pound LMTV. A light one. A casual bump wouldn't even be noticed. It would take a significant impact to shake it. He says that afterward, he could hear the sound of footsteps walking around the truck, and that they stopped at the passenger door to the cab. He had his feet primed for 15 or 20 minutes to donkey kick someone in the face if they tried to open the door. He's 6'2" and was scared witless. It doesn't take long to find out that our tent and campsite are screwed as well. There's an uncomfortable aura that lingers. I have this intense and ominous feeling of being watched, like I was not welcome, and maybe even in danger. It's so strong I couldn't stay up there alone. A constant creeping chill that there was always someone or something behind me. My medic ends up approaching me and tells me out of the blue that there's something up there, that he was looking for me when I was gone, and that he suddenly realized he shouldn't be up there alone. He started walking away, but said he kept turning around because he could hear someone or something following behind him, and it really freaked him out. Another guy confessed that he too refused to go up to our campsite because it felt really creepy, like the Blair Witch or something. And another guy said that there was definitely something up there and didn't feel like he was alone. At all times of the day and night you would feel it. Then I got a couple of guys to come up there and we laughed and joked about. The feeling got substantially tamer. Eventually we jumped TOCs again. Whatever it was that had been living there when we arrived had kindly stayed as we left. Never been so happy to jump sites like that. Didn't have any more trouble while I was out there. I'm posting this to pass on an interesting story and to, hopefully, find anyone else with a similar experience in this location. My wife and I were camping last year in Blue River Reservoir in Oregon. We camp here often and decided to explore up FSR 520 and found a cool abandoned bridge far back in the woods over Cook Creek. This spot was beautiful, and we were set up over the river on this long abandoned bridge over the creek. If you've ever been in the Oregon woods, you know that they can give off a creepy vibe, and this was no exception. But it really was a dream campsite, being 40 feet directly over a river, while on a bridge with limbs growing everywhere over it, isn't your everyday spot. I'll throw in for background that there was no one within the last 3 miles of us, and we had to hike in a little from our car, approximately 1/10 of a mile. We explored around the area for quite a while and didn't come across anything out of the ordinary, besides a pair of shoes and a name, Mona, written in ash on a rock of the fire ring. While we were sitting by the fire, I noticed a very bright flash of light over the river and snapped my head up but didn't see anything. A few moments later, I was paying closer attention and watched a ball of light float, even with the bridge 40 feet in the air, from one side to the other in the woods over 50 feet. The light was very blue. My thought the first time had been somehow headlights had come through, but I would have heard a car, and no man-made light could get to us in this isolated area. This blue light was unlike anything I had ever seen. I mentioned it to my wife, but didn't want to freak her out, so I dropped the subject soon after. Later that night in the tent, we had the mesh lining up so we could see outside. My wife gasped and watched as the blue light floated at the end of the bridge, 30 feet away, and hovered in the air. After a good bit of time, it shot into the woods. It being late at night, we were obviously scared of someone's headlamp, but it shot away 40 times as quick as any human could go, and we saw nothing attached. Our dog left the tent and stared at that spot for the next 10+ minutes, while also peeking down the side of the bridge very seriously. Has anyone had a similar experience on Forest Development Road 520 in Blue River Reservoir, Oregon, or had any similar experience in the PNW? Alright, so this happened a couple of weeks ago. I've told some of my friends, and every time I say it out loud, it just makes less and less sense to me. While it's not particularly horrifying, it was certainly something else. Tell me what you think of this. To start, my name's Alex. A good buddy of mine, Brian, invited me to go to this Christian camp. Now, I'm not very religious, but I like camping, and I like him and his family, so I said I'd go. It was a beautiful place, but way different to what I was expecting. Usually when you go to camp, you kind of keep to yourselves and set up a tent on the ground somewhere. However, here, it was like a whole community of people with trailers, tents, cabins, etc. There was daily activities and events. Everyone knew each other. It was like a family reunion where I didn't know anyone. Very different to how I normally camp, but I will say I had a great time and I felt very welcomed. I met lots of people, made a few pals, and learned a little more about Christianity, though it didn't sway my stance. Anyway, 2 of the people I met were named Emily and Mike. They were a few years older, but that really didn't matter. Great people who loved to party, and that was just dandy with me. I like to have some fun myself. I want to say it was like day 4 of my stay there, and it was around midnight. Everyone was going to bed, but the 4 of us stayed around the fire and had a few drinks. For those wondering, yes, drinking was definitely against the camp rules, but whatever. We were having fun. Mike then asks us if we want to go for a bit of a walk. Feeling good and not yet tired, we all said sure and off we went. Mike and I were both barefoot because why not? It's nice to feel the earth under your feet, and it didn't slow us down much, so we rolled with it for the stroll. We weren't just going to take a walk around the grounds though. We wanted to go across the road and take the trail for a little hike, so we did just that. Brian and Emily led the way with the lantern, and Mike and I followed right behind, drinks in hand. After a couple of stops to chat and take a quick rest, we continued on our journey. We were probably about 2 kilometers away from the camp when Mike and I suddenly realized Brian and Emily had marched right ahead, leaving the 2 of us behind. It didn't seem to make much sense though, because they were right in front of us the whole time. It's like they triple timed their walking. We didn't think anything of it. We also weren't too afraid because Mike had basically grown up in this place. He's been going here for at least 30 years or so and knows the trails very well. We had some moonlight and it was not like our eyes didn't work, so we just decided to take our time, chill out, and enjoy the beauty of the night. However, if anything did happen, my phone was dead and Mike didn't have his on him, so in hindsight, that was probably a mistake. We stopped for a few minutes so Mike could have a smoke and we chatted about some deeper topics, or at least it felt deep. Mike and I were really bonding, and it seemed like we could have kept our conversation going for hours. But out of nowhere, we hear this sort of screaming sound, probably 50 meters away. Now, we're in the woods of Canada. Lots of things make strange noises. We were trying to figure out what it could be. Mike said cougar, I said fox. It screamed again, and we still couldn't quite determine which one of the two, if either, it could be. So we hushed and waited for it to do it again. It took a couple of minutes, so naturally we got to talking again, but when it did scream, it wasn't quite the same as the first two. Something sounded a little off about it. The distance seemed to stay the same, so our concern didn't necessarily grow, but our curiosity most certainly did. Then we really stayed quiet so we didn't miss it or mishear it with our talking. It took less than a minute this time, and it was clear as day. In a weird cougar fox-like scream, it screamed Alex. Mike and I stood still for a second and looked at each other. Mike said to me, "Did it just say your name?" I stayed quiet as I looked on into the woods. I say with certainty it wasn't a human, so I knew it wasn't Brian or Emily looking for us or anything. Plus, it was in the opposite direction of where we had to go and where they went. As I'm trying to process what I heard, I'm making an attempt at rationalizing it in my head. My thoughts are interrupted by another scream, just as clear as before. It screamed Alex. I turned to Mike and said, "Yep, that's definitely my name." "What the hell is that?" Mike had a little chuckle and said he didn't know. As I started to follow up with my worries, he shushed me and said to wait. He wanted to hear it again. I suppose I did too, but by this point, I just wanted to start heading back. I was getting increasingly uncomfortable. After the third time hearing this thing scream my name, I said to Mike, "Okay, let's get out of here. I'm not sure I want to meet whatever that is." He complies, but starts talking about how he isn't worried because God is right there with him and stuff, which is fine, but it brought me little comfort. We start making our way down the trail. We took a shortcut because if we took the trail, it would have been roughly another 2 kilometers back. So we barefoot bushwhacked until we ended up on the trail again. We reached the hill where the trail began, and I heard Brian making a sort of caw sound. Mike and I returned with our own noise and began making our way down the hill. Had a laugh about how instead of calling our names, he's making a crow noise at the base of the trail. When we got to the bottom, Brian had informed us that we had been missing for about an hour and a half, and that he and Emily along with Mike's wife were getting pretty worried. Mike and I were blown away. We could have swore it was no more than a half hour or so. Maybe the time thing was just the drinks, but I swear on everything I care about that something was screaming my name. Something Mike or I couldn't identify. We went back up the following night, just to the top of the hill, but we got nothing. No screams, hardly any noise at all really, which in itself is uncomfortable for a forest. It was just an unnerving experience, and I'd be cool if it never happened again. Any input on what we may have heard that night would be appreciated. When I was 12 years old, I went to an outdoor school camp for 3 days. Practically our whole grade was there. It was Camp Chief Hector. I still remember my counselor's name was Coda. I had a lot of fun there, but I got extremely scared when it came to nighttime. My room was located at the very end of the hall inside the cabin, right next to the emergency exit doors. It was me and my friend, along with two people we didn't like inside that room. On my first night, I had horrible vibes from the room, and it being so strange. 2 bunk beds and 1 window, a little square room, and it just had a horrible presence. I made it through one night, and the rest of the day was fine. My second night was worse, and I began thinking something was outside our window without any proof. After the second night, me and everyone in the room had bad vibes, and my friends in the next door room didn't. I had no idea why until the third night. On the third night, I was woken by a light in the hallway from the door of the outroom being open. The light was faint since it was way down the hall. I was on the bottom bed of the left bunk facing the door, and my friend was on the top bed of the opposite bunk. One of the people in our room left the door open when they went out. The other one was asleep. My friend was also awake, I just didn't know it. When I woke up, I automatically put on my glasses and was looking around until I see the coat rack in the corner move. The coat rack had our coats on it, and next to it was a chest of drawers. He wasn't naked, but I could only see the silhouette of his body. His hands were up, covering his face. He was crouched in a frog position, almost on top of the chest. I was stuck there, just staring at this kid I had never seen before. I said nothing. Here's the best part. He lowered his hands and revealed his face. He was staring at me, smiling a huge smile. His eyes were huge. He kept staring, but slowly he was moving off the chest closer. I was stuck, and my friend this whole time was seeing what was happening. He was also frozen. Then suddenly, my guy Jason, the guy from the washroom, came back running down the hall and slammed the door shut. My friend and I were suddenly out of our trance and got up instantly and flinged out our flashlights pointed to the corner. The kid was gone. I explained why I pointed my flashlight to the corner, and then he explained. We both saw the same thing, and to this day, we still talk about it sometimes. Thank God there wasn't a fourth night. We didn't explain the story to Jason because he was an ELL student, and the other guy was an annoying person we didn't like. I remember the whole thing so vividly. It's crazy how we both saw it too. When I got home, I told my family what happened, and I began my research to see if anything happened at that camp. I didn't find anything. So this is my story. 2017, Camp Chief Hector, Alberta. That's when it happened. It was late fall in 2010 in northern Canada. I lived on a reservation my whole life along the border between Ontario and Manitoba. Dense, untouched forest for miles and miles, super isolated community, fly-in only, aside from the ice road in the winter. I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone was bedded down for the night, I decided to grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out of the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I could hear the noise and focused on the spot. I felt kind of funny, like dizzy or lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly, and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and along the tree line, I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative. "Hello," they said. "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice, and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry, shouting at me to come here, so I turned away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank, and I could hear the heavy breaths of the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself, and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back, and I yelled that someone has my leg. My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw, and that it looked like my relative, but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too, I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards. I would see things, dark figures looking into my window, or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I was seeing this figure daily. I went to a medicine man or shaman for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieves it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I also learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I love being outdoors and hunting in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid the price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real. I can attest to that. This story happened last June or July. My family would always spend about a week up north around the same time every year, until just recently since my brother and I are getting older and schedules are getting in the way more frequently. We spent time at a bunch of different campgrounds in that time, but each time we were always supplied with a cabin rather than tents because my mum and I aren't that into nature. Anyways, we would be up there with a bunch of family friends and we'd always have a good time. One of the first few days we were up there, my immediate family was all sat down in the kitchen enjoying breakfast when the topic of ghosts came up. I've grown up believing in ghosts because of how prevalent they are in my family. I lived in haunted places growing up, and my parents had had strange encounters when they shared an apartment, etc. So this topic wasn't super unusual, and always resulted in hearing some of the craziest ghost stories we have. One of which was about my grandmother's brother, who I'll refer to as Pete. Our family tends to have a lot of weird encounters involving family members or people that are not strangers, so again, was super normal to talk about this topic at the time. For context, Pete lived a not so great life. He was very angry and sad, and that resulted in him taking his life in his house. Now the rest of this story is a bit fuzzy to me, but I'll tell you what I know. My godmother lived in this house for a while, and my parents, specifically my mum, would come visit her. She said the energy in that house was always awful, especially by or in the walk-in pantry, which is where it happened. Pete was a very angry spirit, frequently pushing things around, dragging things across the living room and leaving a mess, etc. My parents made sure to tell him that he was not welcome. Fast forward a bit to when I was born. My godmother was a major part of my life. She helped babysit me when I was younger. She also babysat my mum, and she was amazing with kids. She passed away around 6 years ago now, and I miss her very much. My mum says that Pete used to follow her around and mess with things even when she moved, and that my mum had noticed that Pete was following her too. It wasn't as dramatic as the house, but little pieces of him seemed to follow them around. Back to the cabin. My parents told my brother, sister and I these 3 stories, which we've heard before, and I remember me telling Pete off rudely. Note, don't be mean to ghosts, especially ones that are already mean. We kept talking about the topic, and suddenly my left ear goes completely deaf, and my right ear starts very loudly ringing. I will say that I do get ringing in my ears sometimes, but never in my life have I had my ear go completely deaf. The ringing got louder in my right ear, and I heard a voice coming from the right over my shoulder. It said, "Nana," with a deep, almost dead growl to it. Nana is what we called my godmother. I remember turning my head in confusion at hearing the voice. Then my left ear came back, and my right ear got extremely hot. I remember I wasn't scared in the moment because of how normal ghosts are to me, but it definitely freaked me out a bit later with all of the context. I told everyone at the table what happened, and nobody was fazed. This is still one of my favorite paranormal stories to tell. So this happened in 2013 when I was 18 years old. It was sometime in the summer. I've forgotten exactly when, but that isn't really relevant. My friend, her boyfriend, and several of his friends were going to camp out for a couple of nights in Sulphur, Oklahoma. They invited me and my boyfriend at the time to join them. Everything had been great. We had a typical summer camping experience with lots of swimming, hiking, and arguing over correctly setting up the tents during the day. Nighttime comes around, and earlier in the evening we befriend some people camping near us and invite them over. We have a nice fire going, and we are all just sitting around talking with our new friends and a bottle of Bacardi Zombie. Around midnight, we all start to get a little restless with our campsite. Our new friends tell us we should drive out to a cliff that overlooks the town. The moon was super bright that night, and we all thought that was a great idea. Kids, don't go hiking in the middle of the night. It's super dangerous. Also, don't drink if you're underage. I mean, you will anyway, but as a responsible adult, I have to say that. Anyway, 9 of us pile into my friend's boyfriend's truck. 6 of us in the bed of the truck, 3 in the cab. By the way, her boyfriend didn't drink, so he was definitely okay to drive. And another point I'd like to make is that I only had 1 drink this night, and at the point of our excursion, it had been a couple of hours since I had had it, so I definitely wasn't intoxicated, and certainly not intoxicated enough to hallucinate what I saw. So where we were was a very dark rural road headed up to this cliff area. There were a few houses up this way, but at the time it was pretty desolate. There were also no cars except for us on this road at the time. My friend, my boyfriend, and myself were sitting on the driver's side of the back of the truck. So we were outside enjoying the breeze. We come up to a spot on the road where we are passing a home. Again, there are some houses out here, but not a ton, and it's not a residential area. It's rural, so no streetlights. As we pass this house, I see a girl standing next to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. She's barefoot, dirty blonde hair that's past her shoulders, light blue sundress with what appeared to be a flower print, and she's just standing there motionless and facing the road. Her face was completely expressionless. I may have thought she was a mannequin had she not turned her head and held my gaze as we drove by and kept staring until we were out of sight of each other. I instantly had chills, head to toe, and felt incredibly uneasy. She looked to be a teenager herself, or a very young adult. She was alone and the house was completely dark, no porch light or anything coming from the windows. I turned to my friend and boyfriend and asked if they had seen that, and I exclaimed how creepy that was. They agreed but didn't have too much else to say. Naturally, I thought whomever lived there was just trying to scare whoever drove by looking like a stereotypical ghost girl. But what made me so uneasy was the idea that she would have just been standing out there, alone, for who knows how long, all in the hopes that someone might drive by. Keep in mind, this was in the middle of the night, and we hadn't passed a single car the whole trip up to the cliff. It just wasn't sitting right with me. We continue on and make it to the cliff and enjoy a moonlit mini hike, and enjoyed the view over this sleepy town, without any other incidents I might add. A few years down the line, my friend and I are having spooky discussions, and I brought up that night. I asked her if she remembered that night and how creepy that was. She told me she had a confession to make. She said, "You've brought up that night a few times since then, and I have to be honest, I never actually saw anyone standing there. None of us did. We actually thought you were trying to scare us, so we played along." She went on to tell me that she does remember the house in question, and she does remember the mailbox and all of that, but that there was never a person standing next to the road beside that mailbox. And everyone else in the car? They hadn't seen her either. They all thought I was full of it, and just trying to scare everyone. What the hell did I see? I remember so many details of what she looked like, almost in a frame-by-frame sequence. I remember the uneasy feeling I got as I saw her and how it felt like she was staring directly at me. At the time, I thought she was staring at all of us, but maybe she was, in fact, only staring at me. My friend has since told me this story thoroughly creeps her out, knowing that I was dead serious about seeing her, and I definitely wasn't messing around. And I'm also way more creeped out now to know that I'm the only one who saw her. I just don't know what to think of it. Every summer since I was 6 in 2012, I've gone to a sleepaway camp, Pennsylvania. The camp has around 5,000 kids at a time and has a relatively good reputation. The previous summer of 2022, I encountered what I believed was a skinwalker, or something of that type. For some backstory, many really bad things have happened at the camp in the past 5 years. My skate instructor got kicked out and sent to an asylum for going, quote, insane. The owner saw something in the street and crashed into a tree where he cracked his entire skull in half. There were also demonic symbols carved into the burn pit. They were not able to figure out who did it, but just assumed it was kids trying to be edgy or counselors trying to mess with each other. But basically, aside from these creepy things, it is a normal camp. Kids do dumb stuff like smoke, sneak out, hook up, whatever, but a pretty normal experience. So it was my final summer camp, so I decided to make it worth it. I was going to sneak out as much as possible. So most people just wanted to sleep, so the first few nights I would just sneak out alone and go to this tiny pavilion at the top of the camp for phone reception. There was a tiny path through the woods behind my cabin that was basically abandoned, but it was a really quick way up to the upper field, and I wouldn't have to worry about getting caught since it's above main camp. For 3 nights in a row, I walked up there, and the best way to explain the feeling of walking in the wooded parts every night was an impending feeling of doom. I just felt like I was being watched and like I was going to die, but being the rational person I try to be, I would say to myself, of course it feels like you're being watched. There's animals, bears, etc. So I continued, and on the 3rd night, as I was walking, I genuinely felt a sense that I was going to die. I got up to the pavilion, which is on a flat field, and stayed there with my flashlight on until sunrise came, and eventually made my way back to the cabin. The next night, these 2 guys invited me and my friend to go smoke. So at 2:30 a.m., We got ready and headed out. I felt much better about having a friend with me, as we were joking around and overall excited. I thought I was just being paranoid. We make our way down to the canteen, which is just a large, wide, empty hallway with booths lining one side and arcade machines lining the other. It's pitch black, and since we don't have service, we assume they may be in the bathroom, which is located at the back of the corridor. As we make our way back, we see a black figure at the end of the hallway, which is an open half wall to the outside. We scream half jokingly, and the figure just stays put. We start yelling, "Who is it? Come on," assuming it was a counselor or the guys. We move closer, maybe 7-ish feet now, and shine our flashlights on the figure, and it runs into the bathroom. We wait outside the bathroom for 10 minutes, confused as to why we haven't heard a toilet flush or giggling, trying to figure out who is in there and why they're being so secretive about it. Note that the bathroom has no windows and no way out other than the door we were now standing outside of. So we wait, and as we're holding our breath trying to hear any sounds of lifelike breathing or footsteps, but there's nothing. Eventually, after 15 minutes, we count down from 3 and tell them to pull their pants up jokingly because we're coming in. We go in, and there is no one there, no sign that anyone could have been there. My friend and I look at each other, obviously weirded out, but not wanting to say anything, and my friend, who is the furthest from believing in any supernatural stuff, just told me to run and not look back. When we get back up to the cabin, we go to the bathroom and close the door. I ask her why we had to run and joke about how someone was probably just trying to mess with us. She looks at me more scared than I have ever seen her and says, "If we put our flashlights on it, why was it still pitch black? I couldn't see any clothing or features or anything other than the outline of a person." I think about this too and smile and say we should probably just head to bed. I wasn't able to sleep that night, and all I could think about was that it had better been my mind playing tricks on me, whether from being in the dark or from being tired, like how you see shadows in the corner of your eye when you haven't slept for a while. Hoping this was an isolated incident, I go around camp joking that last night my friend and I saw a skinwalker. Everyone brushed it off except for senior staff members, people that had been there 10+ years, and the owner. They just looked at me, but not like I was crazy, but like they were genuinely scared. This brings me back to another aspect. When I was younger, people would go treasure hunting in the woods. Metal detectors, shovels, you name it. Mark, the owner of the camp, claims that back in the 80s, a kid took something that belonged to the camp since the 50s and locked it in a little black box. And if anyone can locate the box, he will give them a $5,000 prize. I always thought it was a myth that he entertains to see everyone messing around, but that was disproven. My hopes that the sighting would be an isolated incident was wrong. Weird stuff kept happening. I started to begin a short romance with a guy, and as we were stargazing, we heard just genuinely unexplainable noises and little flashes of light in the sky above us. Not too weird though. But then one night, when we were on our way back from the upper fields, as we crossed a flat part of the land that ends with maybe a 6-foot drop, as we were walking, we saw a black figure with white eyes, head and shoulders looking at us from the drop. The boy, who we'll call Brian, dropped to the ground and brought me with him. He had us lay flat on the field, and we both were terrified. This is when I knew it wasn't disillusion or anything like that, because how could we both possibly react to something at the same time? We look up and see it hiding behind a bush about a foot away from where we saw it. We stood up after about 30 seconds and moved forward, hoping to see a person, or even a bear would be more comforting. We run down the same hill we saw it and continue to run the same direction. He turns to it, attempting to assemble dominance or something dumb from a movie, and of course I turn around with him. The creature is about 7 feet tall, just like pure black with no features whatsoever. It stares directly back at us with white eyes, not piercing, almost just like they were little holes poked in a black sheet. At this point, I start sobbing and saying we're going to die, and that creature's not human. We continue to speed walk backwards while facing the creature, and the creature bends down where there's a little black shadow box and just goes in, and poof, it's gone. My theory is it's the same box that the owner has the hunt for, but that could be a stretch. But basically, with still a terrible feeling of impending doom, and I'm sobbing, Brian comforts me, just repeating, "It was just a bunny, it was just a bunny." This went on for so long, it seemed like he was saying it more to himself than me. I tried to say there's no way it was a bunny, but every time I started the sentence, he would just look at me and say, "I know, but we have to keep walking." He came back to our cabin since he didn't want to walk alone after this and slept in the bathroom until the sun came up and ran back to his cabin without being caught. The morning after, I tried talking to him and he was just so out of it. I talked to the friends that he came to camp with, and he said they had a similar experience to the first one I had, but they also brushed it off. As this was my last year of camp, I decided it made more sense to rationalize the impossible than to spend every night while my cabin mates are out having fun alone.